Welcome to the second presentation in the Georgia Lacrosse Officials Association training program for rookies using two-man mechanics and the 2020 NFHS Boys Lacrosse rules. This presentation will cover information that can be found in Rule 1 in the rulebook, um, and this mostly deals with the field and game equipment. This is a lacrosse field. This is a diagram that can be found in your rulebook. These questions are always on the test, whether that's the GHSA test, the Federation test, or the US Lacrosse test. So familiarize yourself with the width, the length, how far various things can be away from other things, whether it's the timer or scorekeeper table, the benches, the coaches area, how long are the wing lines, all of these things. And we'll go over what all of these things are called in just a second. But this is a nice reference um, tool that you can use when taking the test. Um, this is the field. We'll talk about cones briefly. There are 7 cones on a lacrosse field, 4 at each of the corners, and 1 at the far side midline, and then 2 identify where the substitution area is, the area that players can run on and off the field during play. Now, let's talk about some of these lines. So you have the sidelines. There are 2 of them, and these lines are 110 yards long. Um, each official is responsible for a sideline in two-man mechanics. You also have what we call the end lines. These on a football field, as you will notice from this diagram, are 5 yards into the end zone, because a football field is 100 yards wide with 2 10-yard end zones. A lacrosse field is 110 yards wide. You have a midline, and then you have these things that are called defensive restraining lines. This is a line that prevents players from coming out of this line during a face-off. So attack players, defensemen, and a goalie must stay behind the defensive restraining line during a face-off. You have these lines, which create what we call the attack box. That is the area formed by the end line, the defensive restraining line, and these alley lines. During a stalling situation, a team may be required to keep it in that area. In addition, when a team is bringing the ball into their offensive end for the first time, they are required to touch this, what we refer to as the box. You have the wing lines. These lines restrict where certain players can be during a face-off. And finally, you have the goal lines and the creases. Now, cones. You have 7 cones. They are at the places that we mentioned, the 4 corners, the midline, and the restraining line. You will find Billy's mom, who's setting up the field for the first time, is going to put basically a cone where every 2 lines come together. So it's important that in your pregame, you look at the field and make sure everything is okay. You want these soft, flexible cones. You do not want the sort of giant industrial road cones, as a player can injure themselves. Lines must be non-caustic, which means they cannot be made of substances such as lye that could burn or irritate skin. Lines should be 2 to 4 inches wide. The exceptions are the goal line, which must be 2 inches, and the midfield line, which must be 4 inches. They must be white or contrasting colors. However, a lot of the turf fields that we use, particularly in Georgia, have multiple sports on them, so it is really important to know what colors you're using, and sometimes those colors will be different. Each sideline will have a different color, each end line will have a different color. It's important to go over that information with players and coaches. The Faceoff X, or the Faceoff square, is where a faceoff is conducted. Again, most of the fields we use are turf, but even then, with some soccer being played, there's often a divot or a dip that allows the soccer ball to stay right where it is before play begins. You don't really want to face off guys digging it out from there. So the official is well within his purview to move the face off a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left. So identifying these markings is somewhat less important than it may seem to be. The midfield line is key. Offsides, over and back, conducting a face-off, you really have to be able to see this midline. You will often see a giant logo painted at the midline. I would note that in football, it is a rule that you have to have a shadow line as well, so none of this is new, but people do love their logos. So a shadow line needs to be painted. If it is not, um, you essentially take the ball away. It's an illegal procedure foul, and you play the game with what you have. Um, Having an illegally lined field is not illegal. You simply write a report, and the GHSA has to step in and make sure that that issue gets fixed. The one time you're going to give a penalty for a field is this midfield line because it's such an issue. Um, Goals. 6 feet by 6 feet, two rigid posts and a crossbar, in ground, flat iron, obtuse angle, or 90 degree. Goals must be orange by rule. The home team's responsible, and if they don't have goals, a reasonable amount of time should be provided. If they fail to provide legal goals, it is a 3-minute non-releasable penalty. I have had situations where I've had one goal was 5 by 5 and the other goal was 6 by 6. We played the game because you switch ends after each quarter. So everybody plays essentially with the same equipment. But this is a big one. Make sure you've got legal goals. This is an example of an obtuse angle goal, and this is an example of a 90-degree angle goal. Um, Nets, pyramidal shaped cording, fastened 7 feet at the rear of the goal, can't exceed 1.5 inches. Really, the biggest thing I look for is it a solid color? You don't want weird patterns on the goal that could distract people or you. It's recommended that they be attached to the ground. Um, a couple of years ago, this rule was added, allowing ground anchors, which essentially stick into the ground. They're sort of like tent stakes, and they hold the goal in place. Um, I don't think I've actually ever seen these used, but if they are used, they are legal. Please note that the ball needs to meet NOCSE standard. NOCSE stands for the National Operating Committee on Standards for Athletic Equipment. They do all the tests. The big issue a couple of years ago is that people were using balls that were not meeting the standards set out in the rule book, and nobody was responsible for testing the ball. A player was hit in the head wearing a legal helmet during a practice and suffered a serious concussion and brain injuries because the ball was not the weight it was supposed to be. It was much heavier than the helmet was designed um, to withstand. Um, Balls need to be supplied by the home team, and they will start out as white, but if both coaches agree, the color can be changed. Um, this is not really a big issue down here. I played college ball in Maine. Most Aprils were, 3 to 4 inches of snow on the field for the first game. Um, so finding an orange ball in the snow is a little bit easier than finding a white one. Again, take a look at the ball. If it says NOCSE, that's great. If not, just get rid of the ball and find a new one. If teams do not have NOCSE balls, you cannot play the game. If the home team doesn't have them, you can always ask the visiting team. But this is a serious issue. So just take a glance, make sure everything's up to snuff. Additional game equipment. Um, while you may have the big scoreboard, you may not. What you're required to have, though, is a timing device. That may be one of these guys. If you've got one of these and you know how to use it, great. If not, you might want to play around with it the next time you're at a field. Learn how to reset it, learn how to start and stop it, learn how to set the time on it, because you may be working with table personnel that have really never done it before, and it's important that you be able to sort of describe them. You do need a visible scoreboard. It can be the flip board, it can be the giant jumbotron, it can be two pieces of paper and a Sharpie. You just need to be able to have something that people can look and see what the score is. A lot of times people will just use a phone, so that's always an option for timing. You'll definitely need cones. You need 7 of them. You'll need balls, like we talked about, and you need a book. This is a book where penalties are marked, goals are marked, timeouts are taken care of. Lots of statistics. The thing we're really interested in is you need to have a record of who has what penalty, and you need to have a record of the players in the game in case you need to fill out a report. We like to know the name of the player and not just blue 51 if you're ejecting or disqualifying somebody. And then finally, we need a horn. While the horn is less important now, since rules changes from about a decade ago, you still need one. Coaches use that to request an officials conference. If the table thinks something is going weird, somebody might have released early from the penalty box. Um, there's a question about how many timeouts somebody has. They'll sound the horn twice at the next dead ball, and officials know to go over and sort of see what's up. So let's make sure everybody's got a horn. Thanks for listening. Again, this is a series of presentations that we're doing so that officials can review information during the course of the season, and that trainers around the country might be able to use this kind of as a flipped classroom and show this stuff, and not take up class time. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and check out presentations on the GLOA YouTube page. Thanks for listening.